He was still working in the West Wing as the director of message strategy. He was friends with the crew we were hanging out with, but we're not sure whether they mentioned, in inviting him over, that we were there as well. A few months earlier, we had written a story about which Sims was clearly still seething. The piece, which we'll get into in more detail later, reported that 2 Trump aides, Andrew Surabian and Sims, would likely be tapped as 2 of the White House's new point men on crisis communications related to all things Russia. To this day, they deny that it was accurate. It was. We'd taken our share of the shouts of fake news that had become routine in covering the Trump White House, and while they continued to criticize the piece months later, Surabian at least had come to laugh about it, and we'd rib each other over the piece virtually every time we ran into each other. Sims, though, was a different story. Our relationship was still on the outs when he sauntered up to our table, a knee-height glass one surrounded by couches adjacent to the Trump hotel lobby bar. Multiple people sitting at the table knew things hadn't been smoothed over with Sims, and they decided to stir shit up. 2 people quickly made a point of bringing up our disputed story about Surabian and Sims, prompting us to insist that actually the story was completely factual. We thought it was all fun and games at this point. Sims didn't like that and made his feelings clear. The next thing anyone knew, he and Asawin, or Swin as his friends call him, were standing inches apart, noses nearly touching, and screaming their cases as others in attendance attempted to break things up. Sims decided he didn't want to deal with this anymore and extended his right hand to shake Swin's goodbye. Swin and Sims would speak in the weeks after this incident. Each would say, over a laugh, that he essentially wanted to rip out the other's throat at that particular moment at the hotel. Relations have thawed between the reporter and the former Trump advisor. In fact, Swin would honest-to-God prefer it if more Trump officials and associates would get in his face instead of rat-fucking behind his back. Sims is a lifelong teetotaler and was as sober at the time as Donald J. Trump always claims to be. Swin, on the other hand, was a few rum and cokes deep and thoroughly pissed off. He rejected Sims's overture, loudly stating at least 3 times, "I'm not shaking his fucking hand." Sims threw up his hands and headed for the door. At one point, between the couches and the lobby exit, Sims turned around and made eye contact with Swin in one final taunt. The Daily Beast reporter took the bait and pursued him across the lobby, yelling the whole time. One of Sims's friends, in an effort to defuse the situation, tried to lure Swin back to the table. He placed a hand on his shoulder. Swin whirled, pushed him, and nearly knocked him over a piece of furniture. By that time, Sims had made it to the exit and no real blows had been thrown. Still, the shouting and drunken emotions didn't stop, and hotel security soon appeared ready to eject Swin. Grinnell, grinning widely, motioned to security that things were under control, and they backed off. Swin walked over to the bar to order more booze. Lachlan was thoroughly embarrassed, and talked to Grinnell for the rest of the evening, dodging whenever possible his idiot, truculent colleague. Eventually, we both needed to get home to our respective girlfriends. In our shared cab ride home, Lachlan flatly stated, "I think my new favorite memory of us covering Trump together is you almost getting into a fistfight with a White House official at Trump Hotel." It was a casually ridiculous episode, typical in our 3 years covering Donald Trump and his era in Washington. And it helped underscore just how thoroughly the old rules had gone out the window. By that time, the Trump Hotel itself had already become a symbol of the bare-naked corruption and gaudy opulence that defines the 45th president's tenure. We were there, mingling with people with whom we'd become friendly, even though they think we're part of a borderline treasonous disinformation apparatus, and we think they're part of an incompetent graft machine. This irreconcilable conflict had nearly resulted in a physical altercation at the center of political power in Trump's Washington. And, in true Trumpian fashion, though tempers flared, threats were made and heated words were exchanged. In the end, not much was accomplished. There used to be a different geographic center of the American political universe. A block from the White House, just across the street from the Treasury Department, sits the storied Willard Intercontinental Hotel.